To get started with soldering, I first have to place the header pins in my breadboard, and I'm doing that super carefully to make sure that I'm at the right distance between the two, and also that I'm not missing any of the board's solder spots. Doing the soldering with the breadboard will help to keep the pins straight during installation. The one danger here is if you add too much solder to a spot, it might drip into one of the holes on your breadboard, and if so, it will spoil that position. Now, before we proceed here, I want to mention that I set the iron to 350 degrees C, which is a tad on the hot side. But I like it that way since it makes for a quick work and usually a nicely shaped spot when it's done. On the downside, if I'm not fast enough, I might damage something. That danger will be even higher when soldering components directly and not just a printed circuit board as it is here. The other things I should mention is that I did a really good job on cleaning the tip of my iron using that wet sponge, and I'm also working with a little fan to blow the fumes away from my face because I find those irritating. Alright, so let's get started. Zooming in here, you can see that I put the tip of the iron down in such a way that I'm touching both the pad on the PCB and also the header pin that I want to solder to that pad. That way I'm transferring heat to both. Now be careful, this is not necessarily always the best way. It actually depends on what you're working on. Items with lots of metal in them, like switches, might need more heat, while sensitive components such as ICs and transistors, they will break if you heat them too much or for too long. Try to consider all these things when you build your circuits. And don't worry, you will get better at that as you gain experience. So as I do my first spot here, I lean the tip into a tiny corner between pin and pad, and then I'm adding solder. Tiny amounts of solder, and I watch as they get absorbed into my spot there. What I'm trying to get to is a little thing that should look like Mount Fuji, starting out flat on the sides with a steep summit. Something like this, although this Mount Fuji is leaning a bit to the side. Next, I do the opposite end, and then the end ones on the other side of the board. I want to pin down that board to make sure it doesn't get away from the headers as I work my way through all the spots. What follows next is me doing spots right, left, right, left. The reason for that is that I don't want to build up a lot of heat by doing them all in a row. And as I approach the middle, I do give things a little bit more time between each spot to allow for some cooling down. And every so often I clean my tip. And at some point I realized it's much easier to work on this taping it down. The last thing I'm adding is the communications header. To make a 4-position one, I pull out pin number 5 from a long row and then I break that row exactly in that position. And then I clean up the edges as good as I can. Soldering it on, I realized I could have done this first thing before doing the long rows, but it's still just okay. In the end, I do inspect each and every spot on the board to make sure that I didn't miss one, or I produced a so-called cold spot. Cold spots can be difficult to see, but if you have a really bad one, it might look something like the one on the right here, or like these. In the end, most of the ones that I have done look okay, with the notable exception of the second one from the left here. Sorry, pin C13. I failed you. I blorbed you. But I guess you'll still do just fine.